pawn e4, pawn e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, pawn a6, bishop a4, knight f6, castles kingside, bishop e7, rook e1, pawn b5, bishop b3, pawn d6, pawn c3, castles kingside, pawn h3, knight a5, bishop c2, pawn c5, pawn d4, knight d7, pawn takes c5, pawn takes c5, knight b1, d2, queen c7, knight f1, knight b6, knight e3, rook d8, queen e2, bishop e6, knight d5, knight takes d5, pawn takes d5, bishop takes d5, knight takes e5, rook a7, bishop f4, queen b6, rook a1, d1, pawn g6, knight g4, knight c4, bishop h6, bishop e6, bishop b3, queen b8, rook takes d8, bishop takes d8, bishop takes c4, pawn takes c4, queen takes c4, queen d6, queen a4, queen e7, knight f6, king h8, knight d5, queen d7, queen e4, queen d6, knight f4, rook e7, bishop g5, rook e8, bishop takes d8, rook takes d8, knight takes e6, queen takes e6, queen takes e6, pawn takes e6, rook takes e6, rook d1, king h2, rook d2, rook b6, rook takes f2, rook b7, rook f6, king g3, King G8. Pawn B4. Pawn takes B4. Pawn takes B4. Rook D6. Pawn A4. Rook D3. King H2. Rook A3. Pawn A5. Rook A4. King G3. King G1. Rook A2. King F1. King G8. King E1. Rook takes G2. Pawn B5. Pawn takes B5. Pawn A6. Rook A2. Pawn A7.